Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and respected learning and development professional and an author from Chicago, USA, Hadiya Nuriddin. Hadiya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Hadiya is the Chief Executive Officer and Chief Learning Strategist of Duets Learning. She's an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. She's an author of two books titled Story Training and Quality Management in Learning and Development. Sorry, let's start with asking you, how did you begin your journey and what led you to learning and development?
Yeah, it's interesting. I graduated with a many moons ago with a bachelor's in English, and I had no idea what you were supposed to do at that point. But it was the 90s, and they were very interested in having people to work in technical support. And even though I had never worked on a computer, it was their standards were kind of low.
Yeah.
So I eventually got into it and loved it actually, but it's a burnout profession.
Hmm.
So eventually, I realized that there was a big training component to this.
Mhm.
And so I just started applying for technical training jobs and eventually got one.
Hmm.
But because the organization shifted, they're like, you're going to have to do it all. There's not just technical training
Yeah.
anymore, there's corporate learning. And so as a result, because it was the type of organization where we did soup to nuts from, Hadiya, here's a project to Hadiya, where's your evaluation? I had to run the whole scope, full stack
Hmm.
of instructional design and facilitation and evaluation and all of that.
Hmm.
And I just stayed with it. It's always, teaching has
Amazing.
always been a passion of mine. And so that's how I landed here.
Fascinating. So, for my viewers and listeners, before I ask you a couple of questions on instructional design, tell us what is instructional design and what are some common misconceptions that you have encountered?
Well, if people have different, and that's part of the issue, if people have different interpretations of what instructional design is. If someone has the title of instructional design, could mean a variety of things. We also call us learning designers and learning architects, and just so many different things.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, our charge is to build a learning experience that shifts performance.
Hmm.
So that could be in a variety of different ways. It could be in a class, it could be in a pamphlet, it could be in discussions, it could be us coaching someone's manager to get people on board. It just has
Right.
so many iterations. But what we do is we take our knowledge of how learning happens,
Mhm.
of the environment that the learners are in, and we apply it to that. And we always say we can't force people to learn. All we
Hmm.
can do is create an environment and activities and a situation where learning is most likely to take place.
Hmm.
So, to me, that is what instructional design is all about.
Amazing.
So one of the misconceptions about it, I always joke that we are the only profession that people think they understand because they went to school, right? They seem to think that Miss Clark in fourth grade was just like, let's just do math today. Why not? Like she didn't have
Yeah.
a plan of exactly what she was going to teach and that she had to teach fourth grade math specifically.
Hmm.
So people's conception of what training is I have information and I'm going to tell you that information. So that's a problem because that's not what it is.
Hmm.
I like to say it's like painting your wall and saying that's interior design.
Hmm.
That's not interior
Yeah.
design.
Yeah.
There's so much more to it. So
Yeah.
that's a misconception that anyone can do it, and sometimes doubts that it's actually a profession. So that's a challenge.
And you've probably seen, I've seen this in some other disciplines also. Everyone has a view and everyone knows
Yes.
how to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, it's difficult because I know that this is their course, right?
Hmm.
This is my client's course. It doesn't belong to me. So this is not a hill for me to die on. But I always believe in what I call consequence management. And
Hmm.
my job is to tell you the likely outcome of taking this route versus that route. And really try to get the point across and trying to be credible in that way. Sometimes it doesn't work, but I certainly try.
Well said. Well said. And over the years, how has the approach to instructional design evolved? And what is the impact of technology on instructional
Yeah. Well, I think most designers have to fight the battle to stay learner focused.
design?
We are inundated with content and deadlines, and it can steal your focus away from what's really important, and that's the learning experience and shifting performance.
Hmm.
So, given the opportunity, you have to learn how to eventually balance what the learner needs in order to shift performance and what the organization needs. We're often accused
Hmm.
of not understanding the business, right? So, an example would be a call center. You know that in order to learn, you can, to accept some content or to be exposed to some content, you need to be off the phone.
Right.
You can't you can't be on the phone and do this at the same time.
Correct.
But they also need them on the phone.
Hmm.
So we're always trying to think of creative solutions or ways to say, how can we get the learner what they need? They're off the phone, they're in an environment where they're learning, or they have something online where they're learning, and yet at the same time help the organization still meet their call quotas. So I would say has changed over the years. It is us now embracing a more learner centered approach. I like to call it learner advocacy, that we're an advocate for the learner. It is true that I need to know about the business. That is absolutely true.
Hmm.
But you need to know about the learner.
Hmm.
So you speak for the business, I'll speak for the learner, and I'll speak. And so let's meet in the middle
Absolutely. Well said.
somehow. So I think
Well
that
said.
that's a big push that we've made.
Well said. And what is the role of storytelling in learning? And why do you think it resonates with learners?
Well, stories provide an opportunity to highlight a change.
Hmm.
Um, and usually it's the same change the learner will face on the job. I truly believe after years of studying this, I used to always fall for the idea that, oh, just tell a story. But I believe that stories are just carriers. They're
Hmm.
just a nice shape and format to put information in
Hmm.
because it has that focus on change and transformation. And then you can put the content in this order, and then the learner can see themselves reflected in that and think if this character can make the change, I can make the change. But your story, you need the right content, the right information. You need to know what emotions to evoke that are
Right.
going to move people in the right direction.
Hmm.
So I'm not like story, story, story. Story is a tool. It's not the only way,
Hmm.
and it's not sometimes the best way.
Yeah.
I always say that the closer a person is to a vision of what the outcome should be, the
Hmm.
less they need a story. So if you have an accounting staff that has a paper-based accounting system and you want to move them to a web-based system, they're going to need a story of what life looks like. But if
Right.
they're already on the web-based system and they're just getting a new one, they don't need a story. Just tell them how to use the new system,
Yeah.
right? So that is one
Great.
of those as well. But it's a lot of emotion involved, and stories help you communicate what the stakes are
Hmm.
so people get a better idea of what they gain
Hmm.
by this training and what's lost if they don't make the behavior change. And stories are just a great wrapper for that.
Well said. And Hariya, what in your view were some of the biggest challenges when implementing quality control in learning and development?
A lot of times we focus too much on the logistics of it. And overall, this is a change management challenge,
Hmm.
first and foremost. So everything you do should support this larger vision. That's what you're changing for, to support this vision of what it means to support your organization. Part of the challenge is that getting that vision. What
Hmm.
is that vision? Because I talk about storytelling and quality management, people wonder, how did you get from here to there? Well, I always say that quality management is the story of L&D.
Mm.
What is your story? How are you supporting the organization? Start there. Don't start with the checklist, because the
Mm.
checklist is the tool that's supposed to support the story. It's
Mm.
supposed to support the vision. And that's why I call it a template graveyard. I have a template graveyard where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then I forget about it. I'm going to do this. It's because it's not hinged on
Correct.
something larger, on a greater vision. So I think that's the biggest challenge,
Mm.
is trying to decide what your vision is, as a learning and development function for quality. And then the logistics of putting it together is hard, but
Mm.
now that you have this vision, it can serve as a guiding light and guardrails for what you want to accomplish.
Amazing. And with remote learning on the rise, maybe that's a wrong statement. It's come down after the COVID, but remote learning is
Mhm.
still getting to be quite a significant chunk of learning. What adjustments have you found necessary to keep learning effective?
I would say that immediate feedback and guidance, or
Mm.
instructor presence, as we like to call it, are two potential casualties of remote learning.
Mm.
So anything you can do to help the learner feel seen and heard is a win.
Mm.
But technically, it's always been a challenge. If I'm facilitating a class and there's 25 people in there, two or three people ask a question, they get their questions answered, but Sarah in the back didn't get her question answered. She didn't get feedback to what she was interested in because she didn't ask for whatever reason. But
Mm.
e-learning, though, Sarah can get her feedback, right? So in some ways, um, it's not true that feedback is a big issue, because you can get it through the e-learning space. The problem is that it still can't. I think AI, that's probably going to be the biggest push in AI, is that you can create these adaptable
Mm.
scenarios and adaptable answers. But for right now, it's canned. She gets one of three pieces of feedback, but she gets it in a way that she may not have gotten in an instructor led environment.
Right.
And you can't really recreate that variability. So anything you can do for that is a win. We always try to promote blended learning if possible. It's a
Mm.
logistical nightmare. I'm
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
balance a live event with an
Mm.
asynchronous event. But anything that we can do to say, hey, all of this learning doesn't have to happen in module 2. You can
Mm.
take it offline. Go
Yeah.
work with your manager for a minute.
Mm.
Go talk to that person and come back. And so it's trying to find ways to incorporate the real life and real work and an asynchronous experience. That's one of the adaptations that we've had to work harder to make now that more people are outside the classroom.
Fascinating. And what qualities do you think are essential for an effective learning facilitator?
I honestly think that facilitation is the hardest job in L&D. It's
Mm.
extremely difficult to do, to
Mm.
be in front of people and to be able to know what you're going to say next, take in information, answer a question, tie it to what Tom said. Remember it is really, really a lot of work.
Mm.
So I would say that you have to balance so many things. You
Mm.
want to be with the learners, not just in front of them. So you want to be sharing this experience with them.
Mm.
Yet, let's not kid ourselves. You are in control. Like,
Mm.
it's always, because of the way the school systems work, people are always going to see the person in front of the room as the person in control.
Right.
So how are you able to do that control? Because people kind of want that. They don't want things
Mm.
to go off the rails, but they also want their experience to be acknowledged by you.
Mm.
They want to be a part of what's being explored. So it's balancing all those. So I say the qualities are just being open, being curious, and understanding what your role is
Mm.
defined by yourself, maybe your boss. But really, when you're in there and the door closes, it's all you. So really defining what it means for you to be a facilitator,
Mm.
and understanding how to navigate those waters that can often be choppy, but it often is rewarding as well.
Thank you. Um, how do you utilize tools like Articulate Storyline and Rise in your designs? And I don't know anything about them, so I'm going to ask you.
Yeah. All right. So, there's sort of a long history behind them. Creating e-learning used to be, quite the challenge. You had to program, which people still do. You had to program them. You had to understand graphic design in a way. It was difficult. They were tough tools to use. And then what we called rapid e-learning emerged on the scene, and which is a misnomer because it's difficult, but it's there's definitely faster than doing it by hand or using other tools.
Right.
So usually the process is like you design the course, you write a storyboard for the course, and then you build it out in these tools. So Storyline, for example, is where you're going to create an interface for the screen. You're going to have, characters, images, text, voiceover. It is web design, it is programming, but it is an easier way to do it because it's drag and drop, it's WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. So yeah, it allows it. That's the good bad news. The good news is it allows anyone, especially Rise, to create e-learning. The bad news is that it allows anyone, especially Rise, to create
Right.
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 So, it's kind of escaped the lab. And so people are experimenting in ways, and in some ways it's challenging because, as I mentioned at the top of our discussion, people thinking that anybody can do this job. And in some ways, rapid e-learning has facilitated that thought. But at the same time, with the discerning eye, people can certainly tell the difference between someone who's just having fun and someone who is educated on how to create effective e-learning. So it helps me, of course, just bring the courses to life. A storyboard isn't anything without being able to shine a light on it, bring it to life, bring in the animation and the voice and the voiceover if possible.
Amazing. And how important is learner feedback in the design process?
It's a challenge because in a perfect world, learner feedback is presence throughout the entire process.
Right.
You are creating an experience for them. So to be able to hear from them and to get their insights, it's just, invaluable. The problem is we often don't get that, especially if you're external. You get feedback from their manager, from your sponsor, from all of those people. And it's rare that you get to actually talk to the learner. So we have a pilot process, usually, not always, but you have a pilot process where they get some access to it. And then you use that to incorporate into the final bit. But that's the final part there. So there are ways to get that type of feedback during the design process when you're interviewing and talking to people. But it's essential as much as you can get as possible, but we don't often get that opportunity, unfortunately.
Well said. Two more questions relating to instructional design and L&D, and then I want to move to your books. What are some tips that you may have to integrate performance assessment into a training program?
I truly believe that assessment should be as authentic as possible. So as much as you can incorporate them into the experience itself, like for example, if you're doing, I always use feedback for example, because back in the 90s, I created so many feedback courses. So if you are creating a course on feedback, don't wait to the end to say, so what's the feedback model? Have them use it as part of the experience. So create scenarios where they have to be evaluated right there in the course, right after they learn it. Maybe before they learn it, sometimes just drop them into the action. Adult learning principles says that people like their knowledge to be valued and recognized. So drop them right into the situation and then start the course from there. So I would say if you're going to include them throughout, include them in a realistic way rather than waiting at the end and having a quiz, which sometimes is necessary for compliance, but that shouldn't stop you from peppering those types of assessments throughout.
Interesting. Last question before your books. Can you share a story where instructional design impacted a learner's growth in a significant way? And I don't want any names, of course.
Um, So I would say that the times where I've seen the biggest wins, it's probably the hardest one, where it's not about performance, it's about a shift in mindset.
Mm,
It's about a shift in belief. It was about them embracing a change. They probably already had the skill all
mm,
along, but it's saying this is going to benefit the organization and then understanding how it's going to benefit
mm,
me. So there have been times I worked at one organization where there was a big change in how we were going to service the customers, how we were going to approach the customers. And we wanted the customers to see a change and feel a difference, which is why we were doing it, but we
mm,
did not want them to feel a disruption. And a lot of that change put more work on the managers, put more work on the employees. And so using storytelling as a way to have them, I kind of equated to a car salesperson where I wasn't selling they're not selling the car, they're selling the experience with the car. So, as much as we were able in this situation to sell the experience after having this information of what life would be like, and what it could potentially be like, that was important. So, anytime I'm able to shift I guess, the hearts and minds, as you say, is always a win because the skills don't change significantly,
mm,
but their belief in the skills and their belief that they can do it
mm,
does.
mm. Amazing. How do you have time for two more questions? And I want to move to your two books. You've
Mhm.
written two books, Story Training, and the second one is Quality Management in Learning and Development. Your
Mhm.
book, Story Training, focuses on shaping stories for learning. Could
Yes.
you share a few key elements of an effective story in training?
Absolutely. So this particular book really focuses on facilitation. So you standing up in front of a group, understanding, wait a minute, something's awry. People aren't really buying into this. And so you coming up with a story from your own experience, even though you may not have the exact same experience,
Right.
doing that off the top of your head
Mm,
immediately.
mm,
That is sort of what this book is about. But given that, and given the fact that I also use the same strategies for instructional design, I would say the key element is change.
mm,
I have a master's in writing, and one thing that they would always drive home to us in our stories is no change, no story.
mm,
There's got to be a transformation, and I really apply that to what I do.
mm.
And that's important because a lot of facilitators will get in front of the room and just talk about the end result.
Right.
I was a store manager, and we had a problem, and now it's fixed. Okay, but what was the journey? I would say the
Mm.
story is not on the coast, it's in the
Yeah.
ocean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jump in the ocean with us and tell us how you survived swimming to the other side. So, what is that change? What led to that change? And if you don't tell them, because it takes some vulnerability to say the starting point was that we were a disaster. It was a complete
Yeah.
disaster. We won't know the difference if you just jump to the other coast and go,
Correct.
everything was great.
Correct.
So it's that changing point is usually where you start. I just
Mm,
watched an author online the other day said, what's your advice for writing? She said, start in the middle.
mm.
And it is sort of like that. It's start with the change and then think about what was life before that change?
Mm.
How did that change affect me
Yeah.
on the other side?
Yeah.
So it is that arc is what I would recommend.
Fascinating. Your second book, Quality Management in Learning and Development, explores building quality processes.
Mhm.
Help me understand the message of your book.
Um, the message is in order for us to make better strides at being a function that fully supports an organization and is seen as such, we need a consistent way of doing this.
Mm,
L&D is performed in a myriad of ways at different companies
mm,
and different people. And
mm.
sometimes you,
Yeah.
sometimes you as a designer will do it in a variety of different ways.
Mm,
I am not advocating that we all do it the same way, but there's certain things that we can put into place, certain guidelines so that the learner has a consistent experience. I think
mm,
we center ourselves in this far too much.
mm,
Imagine the learner there's 5 instructional designers. They take these courses and they're all radically different. So we put it on the learner to figure out how these two approaches work. We need to stop centering ourselves and center their experience. You can decide what those guidelines are and how far-reaching they are, but you need to do the work. Don't go Google online checklist. Talk to your people, see what's feasible. I like to say guidelines will often exception themselves out of existence, right? So that means that people will be like, well, I could do this, but I couldn't do this then. I couldn't do that. Be flexible, build a system that works for you, but having consistency is the key to quality. It's easier to onboard people at that point. It's easier to fix things. It's easier to scale up or scale down if you have consistent processes and guidelines.
Interesting. And on that note, Hadiya, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey into learning and development. I think we covered a lot of ground. You spoke of some common misconceptions. You told us about the approach to instructional design. You also spoke about the role of storytelling. We discussed remote learning. We talked about technology. You also shared with us a couple of interesting stories and about the qualities needed for an effective learning facilitator. And finally, you talked to us about both your books. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.